Matthew McConaughey in his green suit.
Yeah, exactly. With McConaughey in his green suit. Well, McConaughey does what McConaughey wants. So,
y'all have seen 500% growth in 2023.
One of the things I think you need as a creative director is confidence.
You are kind of using that as like the front door to getting to tell more story.
We have gotten deadly at speaking the language of our users.
What would you say was like probably your riskiest bet that you made?
There's really no right or wrong answer. The challenge is like, did it work?
I'm Colton Holmes, and today I'm your host on The Rough Draft. In this episode, I sit down with Philip Etzel, a creative director with a background spanning across e-commerce, advertising, professional sports, and tech industries. Etzel has led global ad campaigns from conception to creation, working with brands like Nike, Reebok, Red Bull, MTV, and Filson, just to name a few. In this episode, we talk about his journey to becoming a creative director and the importance of taking risks in the creative industry. We also chat specifically about his work with Austin FC and Ladder, and how he uses Seth Godin's concept of the purple cow to stand out and drive success. All right, here's my conversation with Philip Etzel. So your journey to becoming a creative director has been an extensive one, is maybe the term I would use, between a writing major in college to a digital marketer to then a photographer, commercial photographer, and then to a director and now creative director. Is that right? Did I miss anything there?
I was in a band for about 7 years.
Miss the band.
I mean, I was only in Rolling Stone, no big deal.
Yeah,
so.
okay. Sorry, I totally
No, I'm messing with you. Yeah, I would call it a complicated and somewhat circuitous route to becoming a creative director, but we're here.
Yeah. So I just want to take a minute and let you explain what exactly a creative director is. I think, people might have different definitions of what that is. Maybe the definition has gotten skewed as like, I don't know, maybe as online media has become more and more of a thing. But I'd love for you to take a second and just define that for us.
Yeah, I think it's just whatever you want to put in your Instagram bio. No, I think it's funny. Everyone kind of claims that title. I think there's obviously a traditional career path and a traditional role of creative director, which is kind of found generally in advertising. But there's a creative director at Tiffany's, actually, Tiffany & Co., Ruba. I think it's Ruba Lee. And she had a really great summation of what a creative director is. And she described it as a conductor or, conductor of an orchestra. The idea is that you're basically the person that's sort of overseeing the combination of a lot of different modalities and industries and craft and, seeing a lot of different styles of creative come together in hopefully a cohesive campaign. So having a background in music and design and copywriting and photography and video, all that sort of stuff comes into play, and why the traditional role of creative director generally takes years and years to kind of work your way into. But I kind of found my way in kind of through the back door, but it feels like a lot of the marketing roles these days kind of have broken traditional norms and are getting there by, sort of starting as a creative and then working your way up. So.
Yeah. And I think that kind of speaks into what I really want to chat about today, which is this idea of being a contrarian in the creative industry. And whenever you and I got to chat a couple of days ago, that's where we just kept going back to, is like being this contrarian, and like the safe bet is the risky bet. Whereas like the safe bet is really the unsafe bet, and the risky bet is really, in reality, the safe bet in this industry, and really probably in most cases. And so I'd love for you to just kind of chat about where that idea comes from, where you got that inspiration. And
yeah, we were talking about Purple Cow, I think I brought up, which is an incredible book by Seth Godin. And that was a book that I read early on in my marketing career and really was influential for me. The premise of the book is essentially that we've all seen a million cows. Cows aren't really that special. But if you were driving down the road and you saw a purple cow, you might stop, you might pull over, you might want a photo with that cow, you might want to buy the cow.
Yeah.
And that's like the opening illustration of the book. And the idea is that as a marketer, creating products that are different will always be more beneficial to you. And thinking about things in a way that's different will always be more beneficial to you. And ultimately, it comes to the idea that, the playing it safe, the safe route is actually a riskier decision in the long run, because there's just less success there. You end up looking like everyone else. You end up doing the same thing as everyone else, and you don't stand out. Versus taking a risk is actually the safer bet in a creative field, or, in really any field, creating a product, whatever that looks like, because you have the opportunity to stand out and to do something different and to be original.
What are some tactical ways that you see yourself implementing that into your work, whether that's processes or tools?
I'll answer that in two ways. Maybe like the sort of the overarching thing that I think about, and then like my actual process. I remember years ago, I was driving down the highway, and I remember having this like sort of epiphany that like, when you graduate from college, I was in a band for 7 years. I was like a freelance photographer for 7 years. I'm like hustling to like build a career, and it was like starting to work. But what I realized was like doing all these different things in writing and music and design and photography, that like I just had ideas. Like that was just, some people, like I can't do math to save my life, but like I can look at a blank piece of paper and have an idea.
Yeah.
And that is like a really, really valuable skill. And I kind of had this epiphany that like, I'm going to be okay. Like I'll be able to make a career, because no matter what I do, I'm going to be an idea person. Like that's sort of my natural setting.
Yeah.
And that was like really encouraging for me as an artist. And like, I feel like other artists don't necessarily think about that a lot, of like, if you can be an original thinker, that's an incredibly valuable skill to have, because not a lot of people are like that. Even people in marketing, they think about, spreadsheets and whatever. Yeah. But Paul Graham has a really great article called How to Do Great Work. Mm-hmm. And in that, he talks about original thinkers. And his analogy, I think, is original thinkers are like angle grinders throwing off sparks. Like they are people that are doing work, and then as they're doing work, just like ideas are just kind of popping into their head and coming. And I love that analogy. And that's how I think about original thinkers and thinking like, this purple cow mentality. In terms of my process, I'm sure everyone has ideas differently. I'm sure there are plenty of people that, just daydream and, and all of a sudden like the muse takes over and, delivers them some sort of ideas. That's not necessarily my process. I'm a little bit more type A. But my process is kind of the combination of collecting. I remember like throughout my career as a songwriter, I would just like write down little phrases I thought were cool. Words, interesting phrases that I was reading. Literally anything in everything that I would see, I would just like write down in a notebook, and I had it everywhere. So when it came time to write, the thoughts that I was having, I could like reference and bring in cool ideas and sort of like cull, creativity into something that was original and unique, like in its own right, but like had a lot of, sort of pulled pieces. Mm-hmm. And that's how I think about ideas now, is like I'm constantly looking for inspiration and like saving inspiration and seeing different things across different industries that I think are really cool. Whether it's like, oh, that's a really dope camera angle, or like that's a really cool shot, or this is a really cool effect, or like whatever it is. And then when it comes time to do my thing, I'm pulling in these different ideas that weren't relevant to my idea, but, sort of get a new life or get a breath of fresh air. And so my process is, I first and foremost, like if I really want to have good ideas, I think creators need time and space, and they don't give themselves that a lot. We go to look for inspiration first. We're like on Instagram, we're on Pinterest, we're, doing things instead of just like allowing ourselves to think. Yeah. And so for me, that's like probably number one place is shower, like white noise, nothing else. Like I don't have a phone near me, nothing else is distracting me, and I can just like actually think about stuff. Yeah. I do my best work. And even like when I go work out, I have my best workouts when I listen to one song on repeat, because I kind of forget, like you find the vibe, and then like I kind of forget that the song is happening, because it's just like becomes sort of pattern. Yeah. Or like white noise. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A drone. And so that really helps me just like kind of zone out. So any sort of like white noise or anything that just like allows my brain to like kind of shut out everything else helps me think a lot. And then from there, I'm like, once I can like have ideas, I'm starting to pull things that I've like referenced, and it all starts to come together. And, ideas evolve over time. When you start something, you don't really have any boundaries, and then as you try to fit it into a box, you get more guidelines and then it evolves and whatever. But that's kind of how I start.
Yeah, that's really good for me. I picked up fly fishing in the last few years, and like just going out and like being in a part of Austin that not a lot of people go, and just like sit in the water and do the same thing over and over, or it just becomes mindless, and your brain gets to start just like thinking of other things. And
there's in that same essay from Paul Graham, How to Do Great Work, he talks about this idea of indirect thinking. And two things I think are interesting. One is like you can solve problems by indirect thinking in ways that you can't solve it by frontal attack.
Yeah.
Like you can try to force yourself to like solve a problem, but like that never really goes very well.
Yeah.
But if you can find, an activity or a space where you can be creative, like sometimes not thinking about something, but kind of thinking about it is like more effective. He also mentions though that in order to be able to do that, you have to be doing work. Like your work and the thoughts about your work have to be able to feed that sort of like subconscious. Yeah. Because if you just like are like, oh, I'm going to go daydream, but you have nothing feeding it, then there are no ideas. It just shuts down. So
yeah, that's interesting. This is Paul Graham essay.
Paul Graham, yeah. Okay. I'll link it somewhere.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Cool.
So you're at Ladder, and so you were mentioning that y'all have seen 500% growth in 2023, and you attributed that to your short form video strategy that you implemented. Yep. I'd love to just hear a little bit about where that came from and how that is even, the risky bet among safe bets.
Yeah, absolutely was a risky bet for a number of reasons. One is every big brand in the world runs ads on, or does performance marketing in traditional, marketplaces or platforms or just even on Instagram itself, like Meta, Facebook. And we, as a startup, can't really compete with their budgets, Yeah. And so we thought, okay, we need a growth lever. What's the one that we feel like we can figure out relatively quickly, easily, and affordably? And TikTok just overwhelmingly was like, this is the fastest growing app in the world. And there aren't a ton of huge brands on there that are really pursuing it. Like feels like there's a huge opportunity. As somebody with a background in video, like shooting on an iPhone, editing on an iPhone is like the easiest thing in the world for me. And I could go from concept to execution like immediately. I think that's one of the really cool things about sort of this creator economy and where social media is now is, it doesn't have the production value of this podcast or a lot of things that you see on TV, but it just is so immediate. And it's also just very transparent. Like on TikTok, the more you try to use fancy marketing language or like good copywriting, the worse your content performs. And the more you just speak like a human, the better your content performs. Like we spent, our CEO in particular, like literally read through thousands and thousands and thousands of App Store reviews. And this is before like you could just plug this into ChatGPT and like it would have just told you all this stuff, which like that would have been really helpful. But he pulled out keywords and then he organized all the reviews by themes. And then like we would look at what words were they using most frequently and whatever. And so like we have gotten deadly at speaking the language of our users and basically speaking the same language back to them. So like they don't need to do any translating in their head of like, oh, this is the marketing speak that you guys are using. Maybe this would be good for XYZ. It's like literally we're just saying things like, people would say on TikTok. And so that was just like really, really effective at communicating with our audience. But like that, again, that's not base setting for how people think about marketing. They think about, let's do some big brand shoot. Let's run ads on Facebook or TV or whatever. And let's like have a copywriter write like a really cool script, instead of like, hey, let's shoot this on the iPhone. Let's use, a creator, somebody that's at the gym, and like, let's just use the words that they would use, Yeah.
What are some like maybe some experimenting that y'all did as y'all were, generating this new team and this idea as it was formulating, maybe some things that y'all took some bets on that didn't work, but it maybe led you to a bet that did work. Like what was some iteration and experiments that y'all did that?
Yeah. I mean, we started everything with like, okay, we want to be experts at this. We want to learn. So we like at the time there were like maybe 2 people that had sort of courses on TikTok, and we were like, all right, we feel like they're experts. We'll try to learn as much as we can. We also were doing it ourselves, like just trying to figure it out as we went. And on the creative side, we had a coach that wasn't on TikTok, but she was like explosive on Instagram, and she was a CrossFit athlete. She was just like the perfect demo to be on TikTok. And she was like, yeah, you can take all my content and just like do whatever you want with there. I don't have time to build a TikTok audience, but I would love for you to do it. And I was like, perfect. I would love to just like test this.
Yeah.
So started testing it. And I think like within a month or maybe 3 months, she had like a few 100,000 followers. Like,
so you took her stuff and created from Instagram and created an account for her on TikTok?
Created an account for her as her, like she's posting it, but like I was handling all the content, basically just like creating off ideas I saw were working on the platform. And it was like the perfect opportunity to test the theory.
Yeah.
And it was just like immediately explosive. Like I remember the first time we had a post that was just like going crazy viral. Greg, the CEO, and I were just texting each other like, are you seeing this? Like, this is insane. Like it just picked up, I just refreshed and it was like 10,000 more views. Like, and that's the crazy thing about those platforms. And what feels like some of the last arbitrage, or at least like right now where we are in culture and society and tech and social media, like the arbitrage right now is like virality, because you can get such outsized attention and views on things that you don't have to pay for if you can get it to go viral.
Yeah. Huge ROI.
Huge ROI, because you probably spent, 10 minutes on this iPhone video that's now blowing up. So that was really exciting to us, and proving the concept was really huge. And we quickly realized that as a brand to work on TikTok, like brands don't work on TikTok because that's what you don't, like none of the audience is on TikTok to follow brands. Like generally brands have gotten a lot better at it. But like at least 2 years ago, no one wants to follow a brand. They want to follow people and personalities.
Yeah.
And so we quickly realized like we need a face for this account. It's definitely not me. But we need to hire a creator that can be the face of Ladder on TikTok.
Yeah.
And that was enormously successful for us. And then we were like, okay, how do we scale that? How do we get more creators? How do we engage more audiences and that sort of thing? So we just kind of grew from there.
And I mean, you and I were chatting about this a little bit before we started, about how you are kind of using that as like the front door to getting to tell more story. Like as a storyteller, like what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the way, just to quickly, not to harp on TikTok the whole time, but like the reason it's the fastest growing app in the world, or at least was, may still be, is because of its discovery algorithm. It was unlike anything that had ever existed before. Instagram Reels have now like obviously ripped it off and are trying to do the same thing, but there was no other platform that took your content and immediately put it in front of new people. And then if it like got some sort of engagement or met some sort of metric, who knows what that is, it would put it in front of more new people.
Yeah.
So the opportunity then wasn't to speak to your followers. Like on Instagram, you would post something and it would go to some increasingly small percentage of your followers.
Yeah.
TikTok is like, I'm going to show this to brand new people. And then if that works, we'll show it to a wider audience of brand new people.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a billboard. It's like constantly just getting in front of new people.
Yeah.
So the equation there is like, how can I make the best billboard?
Right.
It's not like, how can I tell the best story about my brand, or like really try to, communicate all these insane product features that we've built into the app that no other app has. Like that's cool, but like that's not a good billboard.
Yeah.
And so we were like, okay, what gets the most attention? What's the best billboard that we can then pull them into the app? And then like, thankfully we have a product that's unbelievable, that has incredible retention, that people are obsessed with. So it's not like we're selling them on some bill of goods. It's like we're actually getting them into a product that is like unbelievable. And then from there we can tell a different story. So we did a campaign last month, or maybe a month and a half ago, called "The Process is the Point." And we flew all over the country. In 4 days, we went from coast to coast, documenting 5 different members all over the country that are avid Ladder users on different teams with different coaches, different training styles, and different personas. One was a single mom. One is a police officer who is like one of the only active police officers that has had a kidney transplant. One is a survivor of Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then, we had an amputee that is on a bodybuilding team in Dallas. And like, we just went all over the country to document these people. And I had this script written that was like, again, not a great billboard for TikTok, but was a very inspiring, motivating script about why do we do this every day? Like, why do we show up every day? And like, why would you just check the box on today when the clock just starts over on tomorrow? Like, you got to do it all over again, And the whole thing obviously comes down to the idea that like the process is the point. That's why we do it.
Unless you don't have to do it tomorrow, you get to do it tomorrow. Unless you were never doing it just to check the box. You were doing it for your kids, for your confidence, for the moment you get to say, I showed up today. And the exhaustion, the sweat, the hassle, those are all badges of honor, baby. Those are all part of the plan. And the process is the point.
Great work today, guys. I hope your legs are on fire.
And we released this campaign, and like for the first time ever, we saw, if you read the comments on those posts, like the members are in the comments being like, I feel so seen. Like, this is exactly why I do ladder. Like, this is exactly why I show up. Like, this is exactly why I fit my workout in after I put my kids to bed and all this other stuff. And it was just like, it was speaking to the exact user of ladder, and it was like so spot on to their motivation. And so it's not something that we would necessarily use for performance or like acquisition on the brand side, but it's one of those brand affinity plays that like creates so much just like loyalty and buy-in. And so that's the opportunity to tell a story. And like the cool thing is all of our teams have team chats where they're all talking. We have a ladder announcements channel, which is it goes to all 100,000 members on ladder. And so we can like send that video out in that campaign to all those members. We send it in all the team chats, and like the conversations that were happening around that were just incredible. So those are the type of stories and opportunities we can tell, but we can't tell those stories until they've gotten into the app and experienced it. So
So as a creative director and thinking about all of your experience of writer, musician, photographer, director, all of those and all of those things, like how do you think that's contributed to your success and how you've been able to take this risk, and maybe even how your CEO like trusted you to take this risk and how it's become fruitful for you guys?
One of the things I think you need as a creative director is confidence. And, as a creative, you don't always have it, or, you maybe feel like a little bit of imposter syndrome or whatever it is. I feel like I'm my personality type. I've had a decent amount of confidence, but in creative director roles, especially with when I was at Austin FC and we were doing things like stadium signage and billboards and all these random mediums that I'd never done before. You have to be able to make decisions that there's really no correct answer to. Like, you have to be able to, to be able to explain why you made those decisions, especially to, higher up or executives or whatever. But there's really no right or wrong answer. The challenge is like, did it work? You know? And so as a creative and a creative director, especially thinking about campaigns that take decent budgets and long, a long amount of time to plan, you have to feel pretty confident in the decisions that you're making. And it's just experience, like having experience as a musician and as a writer and a photographer and working on just so many different, vast array of projects over, 10 plus years, 15 years, just gives you more confidence when you have to make a decision in a field or a project that you have never done before or been in before, that it's the right decision. So I at least have something to go off of, or a reasoning behind why I make those decisions creatively, even if they're sort of in, gray space. So,
and I mean, as a creative director, you kind of have to have a holistic view of all of those mediums, right? And even thinking about Austin FC, whenever you got to, develop that brand and help, push the creative there, which I get to see all the time going to the games. Like, it seems like that might be this picture of this culminating, career journey that you've had, and like a little. I feel like you probably got to pull a little bit from each one of those experiences of photography, of music, of writing, like all kind of culminating into this one.
Definitely. Yeah, that was definitely the biggest challenge so far, because it was across every medium. It was honestly the most analog, like creative role I've ever had, because
and also building a brand that is like trying to tap into the creativity of the Austin culture too, right?
Yeah,
like, so it's like kind of
yeah.
It's like twofold, right?
Yeah, and getting seen by 20,000 people in physically every single week in a stadium. You know, it's like it's got to live up to more than just like an Instagram post,
right?
So that was definitely a challenge, and it was really cool. It definitely was the culmination in a lot of ways, but also it was a lot of new stuff. You know, like I had never done stadium signage, or I had done like some in-store display stuff with a menswear brand that I was a creative director for and founder of before that. But just like it takes it all to a whole new level when we're gonna design a van, and we're gonna wrap it, and it's gonna be a live activation that drives around Austin. It's called the Verde van, and like, what is it gonna look like? What kind of van is it? What does the experience feel like? Like that's a whole nother medium if you have like a graphic design background or a photographer background, Yeah. So a lot of it was new, but a lot of it was, really, really eye-opening. Yeah. So definitely a great experience.
Going back to this whole theme of like the purple cow and taking risky bets, like how did you approach that with that mindset, and how did that lead to success there? Yeah,
I think Austin FC was a really interesting project and challenge, because first and foremost, it's Austin's first ever professional sports team. It is, it was the newest MLS team in the league that year, and there really wasn't a city that was that similar to Austin that had launched an MLS team. Yeah, and Austin as a city is so unique. Obviously the slogan for the city is "Keep Austin Weird." And so we were trying to create a team and a brand that represented the culture. Like that's what every good sports team is trying to do. Yeah. It's like, how do we reflect the ethos and personality of the people that we represent? Yeah. If you watch Wrexham, this is like something they're awesome at. Yeah. But like that's what every team is trying to do. And Austin being just such a like unique city with such like a cultural history of live music and just like analog arts, we had to like build that into everything that we did. And that was at the macro level of like how we thought about our activations and our slogans and the songs that the supporters are singing and the rituals that happen in the game, like the heartbeat of Austin hitting the drum and like all that stuff we thought about. And
Matthew then McConaughey in his green suit.
Yeah, exactly. With McConaughey in his green suit. Well, McConaughey does what McConaughey wants. So, but also is a great representative and ambassador for the city. But even on the micro level too, down to the very detailed like minutia of, okay, from a design perspective, everything we design is going to have some sort of analog texture. So we're never going to put something on a black background. It's going to have like a little bit of a grungy, gritty paper texture. Our type isn't going to be clean type. It's going to be stamped or have a little bit of a graffiti effect. Our photos aren't going to be super clean, fast photography from the world that I'd come from. It's going to have a little bit of a filmy effect, and it's going to feel a little more analog. So that sort of ethos really permeated everything we did as a club. And they've evolved that, and it's still built into the culture of everything that they do. The one interesting challenge that I'll talk about with Austin FC was when you build a brand. Generally, you work with a design agency, and they give you like your brand guidelines. The Butler Bros in Austin did Austin FC's original design guidelines. They did an unbelievable job. I wasn't a part of that process, but I came in like right before the team. Like the stadium was just basically a pit of sand, but and it was like in the middle of COVID. But basically, all I had to go off of was like a PDF, which like again they did an awesome job with. But the problem with a PDF is like it covers 3 use cases of thousands of use cases. Like you're as a design agency, you're never thinking about like, okay, if you guys ever do, and you can't plan for like when you guys do, you know, a wrap in the stadium on a wall, like what's that going to look like,
Right,
you know?
yeah.
So the challenge as creative director for a brand new team, trying to do something really ambitious in the league and in professional sports. It was like, okay, how do I take this PDF and now translate it into like literally everything that we do, all of our social assets in game, all of the, you know, all the little LED screens you see that line the field. Like, how does that, you know, get translated? Even like the live score bugs on like live broadcast, where it just shows like, you know, 1-0, Austin, whatever. We even had like little collage effects happening in those score bugs too. Yeah. So we probably took it maybe too far and just like and spent way too much time thinking about all that stuff. But like that's the type of stuff and the type of detail that really gives like a brand, you know, an ethos and cohesiveness too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you did an incredible job, and it's fun to
Thanks,
see
man.
it every week. What would you say was like probably your riskiest bet that you made in that, context that, you know, had a really big payoff that you were maybe surprised by or most proud of?
Yeah. I think for me, the riskiest bet was actually entering the world of creative director. I had worked for myself for, you know, over a decade. I was in a band. I was, you know, a photographer and director running my own business. And when I got into photography, I thought like down the road, creative director could be a pretty cool role. I have a pretty, you know, wide background of skills and mediums that I've worked in. But the idea of like going to an office every day to working for, you know, like in a corporate structure and working for, you know, a brand felt like a pretty risky step, just because like I wasn't in charge of all the shots. And especially in pro sports too, where like I had never been in pro sports, didn't really know like, you know, what all that entailed and how intense that was and how quick things have to turn around and, you know, everything that comes along with it. But I was like, when else am I going to get an opportunity to be a creative director for a pro sports team in a city that I'm born and raised in, that I like know inside and out?
Right. Yeah.
And so that was just like, I knew it was a risk, but it was definitely, you know, an unbelievable experience.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting like perspective on this idea that we've been talking about of like, for your work to stand out, it needs to be different, but also for you to grow and to stand out, you need to also be pushed to being different too. And so it's kind of like, for me also, like that's when I've been grown the most as a creative, and more even just like and my character grows, like so many, there's so much growth and maturity that comes along with doing something new that pushes you outside of safety, outside of, you know, like this safe bet that, you know, just pays dividends on
100%. Yeah. The idea of the Purple Cow is obviously very applicable in art and in product, like creating things, but also in your career, in your life, like pushing towards like what excites you, what interests you, and like trying to find sort of new frontiers or like gaps. That's again another thing that Paul Graham talks about. I keep coming back to this because it's like so dense and so good, but like trying to find those gaps and like being willing to like move into those gaps, knowing that you don't know, you know, what you don't know and you don't know much, but like you're willing to take a chance, has like always been so valuable and fruitful for me. So
yeah, that's good. Well, Edsel, thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure to get to chat with you. For those who have been listening, how can they connect with you online or find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Edsel, EDSEL. I don't really like have anything I'm pushing at the moment. I used to do, for 5 years, I did a daily sort of like little, this is actually inspired by Seth Godin as well, who does the same thing. He does like a daily newsletter. It's just like it was like a short form commentary on being a creative or social media or just the, you know, working for yourself as a freelancer. I've taken a break from that. I'm hoping one day I'll write a book on that. But for now, you can just find me on Instagram and definitely, you know, check out Ladder. It's the best product I've ever worked on and the best brand I've ever worked for. And so really excited about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll put all that in the show notes too.
Cool.
But Edsel, thanks again, man.
Thanks for having me, man. And thank you for the purple light to match the theme of the episode.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even think about that.
Cheers.
Well, that's it for season 1 of The Rough Draft. We hope you've enjoyed getting a peek into the creative minds of our guests as much as we have. We'll be back soon for season 2, but in the meantime, head over to rev.com/podcasts to catch up on any episodes you've missed or to find resources mentioned in any of our episodes. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next season of The Rough Draft.